Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Shamita.
Good afternoon.
Difficult time to keep you all awake. I think. Okay.
You are not audible.
Okay.
No, it's breaking.
Okay. Let me see. There was a complaint in the morning also. Probably. How is it now?
Yeah, now better.
Is there a noise?
No, not to me.
Right. So we've been discussing the accounting cycle. So we've completed that one, and we did the entire process of the accounting cycle. And we've discussed about how to record transactions. Step by step, we went through. Now we are going into a new topic today, that is company accounts. Let me share the screen first. I'm sure you have got the notes, right? Have you received the notes?
I don't think so.
No, we didn't receive, sir.
No.
No,
No, we haven't got it.
I just shared through chat box in case you haven't received it. Okay. Right. Then I have shared you in case you haven't got it, but anyway, I'm sharing the screen. You can see that. Okay. Now look. Who else wants? Someone wants email. Who else wants me to email? I can add.
Sir, it's already shared to the e-learning portal. You all can download it from e-learning portal.
Okay.
I actually went into the e-learning portal. Where is it shared? I just went to financial modeling and checked.
With last week video.
Okay.
Video, no.
Yes,
It
after that you can see the two notes there. 5 and 6.
No, I don't see that actually. I see the
But
last
general,
week's video. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I have the Excel with, sorry, I have the PowerPoint, so it's okay.
I just shared in case if you want, I can we can even email.
It's under the 25th September video.
Yes, you are correct.
Yeah, it is there. I was looking at last week's video.
Ah, right. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. So everyone got the note, right? Okay. Right. Now we've been discussing these different topics, right, all this time. We've discussed things applicable for different types of organization. It can be a sole proprietorship, it can be partnerships, etc. Now, when you say company accounts, we are now looking at a little bit on the company setup. We have already discussed in a previous lesson about the features or what a company is and what are the main features of a company compared to other types of businesses. We've already discussed that. Now, I'm going to discuss a little more that is relevant for the discussion today. These are the topics I'm covering. Right. Attributes of corporate structure. When you say attributes, as I just mentioned, we have already discussed some of the key areas. I'm recalling some of them and I'm talking a little further on some other areas. So limited liability is one of the key things that distinguishes a company from other types of businesses like sole proprietorships or partnerships. And I think we are aware what limited liability is, right? Basically, the liability of the owners or the investors is restricted to the amount they invest in the company or the amount that they invest to purchase shares. So that's the maximum liability. Now we need to understand this. When you say liability in a practical sense, let's say you invest 100,000, that is your liability. Now, from the company's point of view, what they are supposed to give you back may not necessarily be 100,000 per se, right? For example, if it is a private company, yes, what you invest is what you get, mostly. But even in a private company or a listed company setup, sometimes when you are not the original investors of a company, and then you purchase it from someone else, maybe from share market, or you acquire it from an existing shareholder, that transaction has no connection to the company. It's just that you do the transaction between two shareholders and you get the ownership of the company. So whatever that monetary transaction you have between the two parties has nothing to do with the company's financials, right? So the company's liability towards the shareholders is what is recorded in their books as the share capital. Therefore, it's not necessarily what you invest. There is a restricted amount, but basically the idea is that it won't be more than that for sure, right? What you lose is, in case of a bankruptcy of a company, you lose whatever you invested, but it won't be more than that. There can't be any further liability coming towards you because your liability is restricted to the investment in the company. That's the idea here. So your private assets are protected. Then, unlike the sole proprietorship companies, proprietorship situations or a partnership situation, a company has the capacity or the legal entitlement to issue shares and other securities like debentures. Again, there are restrictions. A private company cannot invite public to come and invest in their company, that is restricted. Private companies have to source funding privately. If you are a public company, you can invite general public to come and invest in your company. You can issue a prospectus and all those other things are there. So that's an advantage or a feature that you have. Not only shares, but also debentures or any other instrument. That's another feature you don't find in sole proprietorship or a partnership situation. Then we have something called scale of operation. Scale of operation is another advantage you have relative to sole proprietorship or partnership situations, because the companies have the capacity or the bandwidth to deal with their suppliers and customers in large quantities, right? Because the operations can be relatively larger than the other two types that we discussed. So as a result of this scale, you have the benefit of what we call the economies of scale, right? So what do you understand by economies of scale? Anyone? What is economies of scale?
When the scale increases, your cost per unit come down.
Yeah. When the volume goes up, the per unit cost comes down, right? Per unit, because if you produce 10 units, your per unit cost could be 1 rupee. If you produce 100 units, probably you can do everything at 80 rupees. Then the per unit cost come down to 0.8, right? 80 cents. That's the idea. Economies of scale is there. When you have the capacity or ability to operate in a larger scale, that gives you an advantage when it comes to per unit cost level. So you can maximize your profitability. So that can be achieved in a company setup relative to a partnership or a sole proprietorship thing. But this is a kind of a contextual statement. You can't say this is the case always in companies and this is not the case always in partnership, because there can be partnerships that are bigger, right? So even sole proprietorship that can be bigger than companies. So then it's nothing to do with the type of the organization per se, right? Irrespective of the type of the organization, whether you are a sole proprietorship or a partnership or a company, when you have the scale, you have the economies of scale. But here, what this point is trying to highlight is, in general, we consider a company as a relatively larger institution than a sole proprietorship or a partnership. So as a result, the scale of operation is assumed to be bigger than the other two. That's how you get this advantage. Yes, Rajiv. You have a question?
Yeah. When you say the liability amounts only to the level of investment, if the company retains profit, that also becomes a part of the investment, is it?
You mean you are looking at the first part?
Yes.
Yeah, the idea of equity is whatever the leftovers in the company goes back to the owners. It can be the share capital or the retained earnings, any other reserves, whatever that remains in the company after settling the third parties, it goes back to the owners. That is a fact that is there. But when we talk about limited liability, what we talk about is the risk from the investor's point of view. In case of a third-party claim from the company, if the company's assets are not adequate to meet that claim, then there is a possibility for them to come back to your personal wealth if you don't have limited liability. That's the case with the sole proprietorship or a partnership, right? Even a sole proprietorship, if the company's assets are not adequate, they can come and tap your personal wealth or assets. But in a limited liability, your liability towards third-party obligations restricts to whatever you invest in the company, not beyond that. That's the idea.
Right. Yeah, my point is, Shaminder, say I invest $1 million in a company and retained profits are 500,000. The company, I haven't drawn it out of the company, it's with the company. So in the case there's a liability, I'm exposed to the extent of $1 million or 1.5 million.
No, your liability per se is maximum, right? That is up to the level of the share capital that you have invested. That means when you have invested in the company, the maximum thing that you lose would be what you have invested, not more than that. That's the idea.
So that's $1 million in the example that I said.
Whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Your maximum loss is what you have invested. That's it, in simple terms. That is in a normal setup. If you have operated within the provisions of the Companies Act and the law of the land, right? So there can be situations now. You can see there are certain cases now. Even you see ETI case and all that. You can see they go and seize their private properties, right? The director's private properties, etc. That's a different story. So then that is not something coming out of the Companies Act thing. That is a criminal law. So if you have acted outside the provision, then you are liable for that breach. It becomes a criminal offense. That's a different story. Right. Then a separate legal entity. So we have discussed this part, right? So you are a separate legal entity. So you have the ability to let the company to operate as a separate entity which has separate existence, so that for legal matters you can let the company appear before court in the company's name without getting you involved as an individual. So that's the idea there. And even for tax matters, you can get the company to pay taxes in the name of the company. So you don't have to appear in your personal names, unlike the other cases. That's the idea. We have, I think, discussed this part previously as well. This is just to recap of some of the things to highlight some salient features of a company setup. There are many other factors, but these are somewhat salient key features that distinguishes the company setup from other two types that we have discussed. Then, so this is captured as disadvantages, but I'm not sure whether it's the right word to use, because some of them are actually inherent features of a company setup. It can be a challenge for a company to operate with those features or restrictions. That's why it is termed as a disadvantage, but it doesn't mean that it's good to get rid of them, because they are somewhat relevant, and it sometimes protects the company's situation or the governance and sustainability. So one is the separation of ownership from control. So why it is a disadvantage? Why separation of ownership from control is a disadvantage? Any idea? Or do you want to consider it as a disadvantage?
Sometimes the wishes and objectives of the owners may differ from the people who are running the organization. In such a conflict, it can be a disadvantage.
Yeah, that's the main, I must say, the disadvantage from an owner's point of view. Because the owners lose the control over the company when you have separate team of people like directors who run the show, there what happens is directors will run the show based on what they think is right and using their own priorities, whereas the owners have different priorities. So then when you have this separation, the owners might not realize their objectives the way they want. So that is why it is considered as a disadvantage, because there can be conflict of interest. The interest of the directors might be different to those of the owners. And as a result, there can be disadvantages to the owners. So we also call this the agency problem, right? Agency problem. Have you heard of this agency problem? You have principal agent setup, right? Who is an agent? An agent is a person who is expected to act on behalf of the principal for the best interest of the principal. And the agent is given a commission or whatever, a reward for that purpose. And the agent is not supposed to work in his own benefit. So in a company setup, the agents are the directors, the principal, the shareholders. So the shareholders appoint directors to the company to act in the best interest of the shareholders. And if they don't do, that will have a issue. That is a risk as well. That's where the conflict of interest comes. And the other thing, although we call it as a disadvantage from a governance point of view, this is a plus, right? Because the companies are subject to numerous regulations, unlike sole proprietorships or partnerships. And then there is this requirement for them to adhere to them. So that's a kind of a challenge, and that loses your flexibility you might otherwise enjoy without a company setup. So that's a disadvantage comparatively. As it stands, when you have this government supervision and regulation, that also builds the credibility among the stakeholders. If you go to a bank for a bank loan, they might be more comfortable in accommodating a company than a sole proprietorship or a partnership, because there is more legal scrutiny and governance around a company than other two types. So therefore, it can become a plus as well. Here, relatively, it has a low flexibility, I must say. That goes down. So when you look at the financial reports of a company, unlike the other two setups, producing financial statements is a regulatory requirement. You can't ignore it. It's not an option, it's a must. So you have to prepare financial statements and audit them. So therefore, it's a special feature which we don't find in sole proprietorships or partnerships. For those cases, it's up to the owners to decide whether they want to have it or not. And also, you are supposed to submit your annual audited financial statement to certain regulators. If you are a listed company, it has to go to the SEC. If you are any other registered company, then you have to send your records to the registrar of company as well. Now, in this case, there are certain other statutory bodies and institutes as well, depending on your industry and applicability, you do that. For example, if you are an SBE, specified business entity, right, that requires you to submit the financial statement to the monitoring board as well. Right? I told you this SMB, right, Sri Lanka Accounting Standard Monitoring Board. They also scrutinize your compliance with the accounting standards. Therefore, you need to send them a report or set of financials along with those policies, and they will look at that as well. And then the company law, that is the Companies Act, requires to produce at a minimum these things at the AGM. Audited financial statement, then the auditor's report, director's report. So director's report is about the affairs of the company from the director's point of view, highlighting various control aspects, governance, highlights, and observations. These are minimum based on the Companies Act, but there can be further based on the needs. Now, sometimes, as I told you, one can say regulation is a negative thing, right? It's bad. But on a positive note, we need to understand that any organization, they connect with the customers at some point. That's what the end result is, right? Whatever you do in your organization eventually goes to the customers. They have to come and pay and purchase it. Now, when you design these regulations, so one of the key things that the regulator pays attention to is to safeguard the interests of the investing public. Because the investors should have adequate information to evaluate whether the investment is doing well or there are issues. And therefore, it's important to have these law-making bodies or the regulators, when they issue these regulations, they try to safeguard the interest of the institutes and individuals, whoever have invested in the company. And there is something called true and fair view. Right? You must have heard of this. How many of you have heard this full thing? True and fair view. How many of you have heard this? What does it mean really?
It's basically fit for purpose reporting, giving enough information to people to make an informed judgment. It need not be just investors, it can be other stakeholders as well. So to the best of the people, the best of the knowledge of the people who are running the company, they are trying to present facts as they are.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when issuing the shares and those things, like everybody should have the equal information, and so should have a true and fair view of the company before investing in the share.
Yeah. So if you look at the word true and fair, I'm going to discuss a little bit in a while. When you say true and fair, in very simple terms, as both of you highlighted, it's about the stakeholders of the company should get adequate, proper information or the truth. Because the idea is, in very simple terms, we discussed about the the separation of ownership and control. When the shareholders put their money in a business, they have a lot of hopes and expectations. But they have no idea what's going on in the organization during the period. So they only get to know what has happened in the end when you receive your financial statements. So therefore, there has to be a mechanism to establish that the stakeholders get to see the real picture of the company. Although they were away from the business, these statements should reflect the real picture of the company so that they can relate it and they can take decisions accordingly. And then this concept of true and fair view is there in the corporate world. It's used by the organizations to express their side of the story, and also it's part of the auditor's job to ascertain whether the financial statement give a true and fair view. Then that is one of the fundamental things that the auditor is reporting on. If you look at the auditor's report, auditor says we have audited the financial statements of the company for the X period, and then we believe that the financial statement reflects a true and fair view of the state of affairs. So that's what the auditor is trying to ascertain. So this requirement to maintain true and fair view is a statutory requirement. It's not something you can say nice to have or anything. It's a statutory requirement. You have to have a mechanism to establish it, and then the auditors will come and check that as well. And also, it's important to adhere to the accounting standards I told you. These accounting standards form part of the law of the land because they are gazetted, and the entities listed in the accounting standards as specified business entities. So the entities that are supposed to, right, that are supposed to get within the net, the companies that should follow accounting standards are the SPEs. So mostly the companies are SBEs, mostly, not everyone, right? So adherence to the accounting standard is a requirement. In that case, it's a must. You have no option. And then you also are supposed to prepare consolidated financial statements, or we call them group accounts. In a normal case, you are supposed to, when you have at least one subsidiary, you have to prepare consolidated financial statement. That's the requirement of the accounting standards. Now, if you look at the independent auditor's report, I think we've seen it. That you can also go to an annual report and figure out. As we know, it is coming from the auditors. So auditors are supposed to be independent. Independent of the management, independent of the company. So what are their objectives? As you can see, there are two broad objectives of the auditors. What are those broad objectives? To certify the truth and fairness of the balance sheet and P&L, right? Okay, that's one thing. That the financial statements are true and fair. That's one of the main things that they do, as I told you. Then, whether the accounts are done in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements, right? Beyond the accounting standards, we have other regulations, like if you're a company, there's Companies Act. If you're a bank, that's Banking Act and central bank regulations. So likewise, you have different requirement. So these are the two things that the auditor will look at, whether the financial statement give a true and fair view and whether the organization is in compliance with the applicable laws and regulations. That's what they mainly look at when they want to give their opinion. Now, there's this misunderstanding among certain people that the auditors do a job similar to an investigator, right? Which is wrong. The auditor is not doing an investigation. Auditor is collecting evidence to ascertain whether the financial statements are true and fair. And in that process, the auditor might come across certain deviations and unacceptable movements or one thing. When the auditor comes across something that is suspicious, then the auditor will dig further and try to validate it. But the aim of the audit is not to find faults. The auditor will not start the process keeping in mind that there is a problem. Right? Therefore, their job is not to detect misstatements. There's no guarantee that during an audit all the misstatements will come up. Then the auditor expresses his opinion. So this is an opinion, it's not a certificate or a guarantee about the financial viability of the company or anything. Now,
I think we lost Shami.
Yeah, I think we lost him.
Sir got disconnected. Within 5 minutes, he will join.
So we'll take a 5 minutes break, no?
No, no.
We are on a marathon since 8 o'clock.
Yes, today. Mr. Kapila extended me.
Sorry, I got a disturbance on my side. There's a power disconnect. Let me share the screen again. Right. So I was discussing about the auditor's report. So I told you it is the intention of the audit is not to find mistakes, but it can come as a byproduct, as a result. So therefore, you can't blame the auditor for not being able to find all the mistakes during an audit. That's not their aim. Then we have the opinion, right? So auditor is doing a job to collect evidence. We call it sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. The auditor will collect evidence. That evidence provides the basis for the conclusions. It is not an automatic conclusion. Auditor will collect evidence and they evaluate, come to conclusions, and then form their own opinion. Right? And they will express their opinion after that, whether they're satisfied or not. And now with this opinion, I think some of you might be aware, this opinion can be modified. This auditor's opinion, it has several versions. Let me quickly give a view of it. The auditor's opinion has two branches, right? So you have two branches, unmodified and modified. Unmodified opinion means there's no change to the standard wordings the auditors use. That is what we also call a clean opinion, right? They say we have audited the financial statement. The financial statements are true and fair and free of material misstatements. That's what they say. That's a standard opinion, unmodified. Then the modified opinion also, there are two branches. Matters that affect the opinion, matters that doesn't affect the opinion, right? Matters that don't affect. That means when you express your opinion, you can modify the opinion by adding certain things, but it won't dilute your overall opinion. Say, for example, if you have heard of this term called emphasis of matter, right? This is called emphasis of matter paragraph. Emphasis. So what the auditor is doing is, auditor gives the opinion, a clean opinion. So we have audited the financial statement, the financial statements view true and fair view. So they give opinion. After the opinion para, you can add a small paragraph or two to say, we would like the readers to draw their attention to note number 5. There may be something very important that the auditors have decided to give a clean opinion considering that fact, but the auditors would like the users also to pay attention to that. Perhaps the users might have concerns on that, right? So I'll give you an example. Let's say going concern. One of the things that the auditors evaluate in a company is the going concern ability, whether the company can continue in the foreseeable future. So when you look at the going concern ability, there are different types of indicators we've discussed, right? Financial indicators, operating indicators, other indicators, etc. And the auditor realizes that this company has lost one of their main customers. And that is an operating indicator for the auditor to doubt the going concern ability, because they know 80% of their sales were to this particular customer. Now this customer is no more there with the company. That gives the auditor a hint. The company's inability to continue because they have lost a major customer. So there can be an instance where the particular company has a parent company probably, and then they get an undertaking from the parent company to say that although there is an operating indicator that might have an impact on the long-term sustainability of the company, we as the parent company gives you a guarantee that we will not let the company bankrupt. We will bail the company out if there's a requirement. So that the parent company gives a guarantee. Auditor might satisfy himself on that measure. We call them a mitigating measure. It's a mitigating measure for a going concern issue. If the auditor is happy with it, auditor might not challenge the going concern because there is an arrangement. However, due to the gravity of the matter, the auditor might ask the company, you better make a disclosure in your financial statement about this fact, right? That the company has this issue and the parent company has given a guarantee. Then the auditor is satisfied and it is disclosed. Then the auditor say, okay, we will issue a clean opinion, but we will expect the readers to go and look at that particular note. That's it. So that is called emphasis of matter paragraph added to the opinion. It has nothing to do with the weight and the spirit of the opinion. Then we have the other branch, matters that affects the opinion. That means the opinion will be modified and the value of the opinion is diluted. It is not a clean opinion. There is a problem. There are two branches here. By the way, this explanation I am giving you has nothing to do with the exam. At the exam, you won't be questioned on these things. I am giving you an idea for your benefit when you read annual reports to understand what it is. Right? So here, there are two major reasons or causes why an opinion of a company can be modified or affected. One is called limitation of scope. There can be scope limitation. The other one is called disagreement with management. Right? One is limitation of scope. The other one is disagreement with management. What is limitation of scope? Limitation of scope means, I told you for the auditor to come to a conclusion, the auditor should be able to collect sufficient and appropriate audit evidence. So there has to be adequate evidence. But there can be certain situations that prevents the auditor collecting adequate evidence. Say for example, due to the pandemic thing, the auditor was unable to verify the warehouse located in, let's say, Mannar. There's a warehouse with a sufficient stock. A sizable stock is there. The auditor could not visit the place and validate it, couldn't collect information about that place. Therefore, the auditor could not collect adequate evidence. Given the size of the inventory, the auditor doesn't want to take a chance and just say it's okay. Then the auditor will say in the opinion, we are happy with the financial statement in overall sense, except the inventory, because we could not collect adequate evidence. So the auditor qualifies the inventory and gives an assurance about the rest. So that's what you do with the limitation of scope. So limitation of scope can be at two levels. If the limitation of scope is isolated in a few areas and you are comfortable taking that component out and give an opinion, you only take that part out and give opinion. So we call it a qualified opinion. Right, so we call it a qualified opinion. Qualified. That means you say except inventory, except debtors, except cash. Likewise, you can take that part out and give your view. There can be several qualifications also. You can say except inventory, debtors, and etc. Right? You can say that as well. The other extreme of this limitation scope is there can be a significant limitation scope that the auditor is unable to collect substantial portion of evidence. Let's say when the auditor goes there, the accounting system has crashed. The ERP has crashed. So there's no accounting records at all now for you to do the audit. Everything is crashed. Right? Then there is a significant curtailment of evidence. If that's the case, the auditor is not in a position to issue an opinion. Then the auditor say, I am not issuing an opinion. That is called the disclaimer of opinion. Disclaimer of opinion. So auditor prevents issuing an opinion. Right? Auditor will not issue opinion. We just say, due to the pervasiveness of the limitation of scope, we are unable to issue an opinion, or we will not issue an opinion. That's what the auditor says. So that's the limitation of scope branch. Then the other branch is disagreement with management. Disagreement with management is, in simple terms, it's not about having an argument or anything. It's basically the auditor is not satisfied with the technical treatment of matters or how the organization has recorded certain transactions. Say, for example, the auditor is not happy that the management has recorded certain transactions against the accounting standards. Accounting standards prescribe the way as to how you should record certain transactions and treat certain items in your financial statement, but the company has treated it differently. There's a violation of accounting standards. So that's a disagreement. There can be a situation where the auditor feels there has to be a provision for doubtful debts, given the riskiness of your debtors with the historical data, but the company has zero provision. Then the auditor is not happy with that. There's a disagreement with the management. Right? Auditor expects the provision to be a certain figure, but the management has not provided. Then there's a disagreement. Likewise, there can be disagreement. This is treatment of accounts. If the disagreement is isolated in a particular area or two, then you can issue a qualified opinion like the previous case, except debtors, except inventory. Likewise, you can go. If the disagreement is pervasive, significant, then the auditor clearly states the financial statements do not give a true and fair view. It's a clear negative opinion, right? We call it an adverse opinion. Adverse opinion. Auditor issues an adverse opinion, right? Auditor says financial statements do not give a true and fair view. So I just explained this for the benefit of all of you so that you know what each of these opinions are, but this is just a very high level thing. But when in the real world, when it actually happens from the auditor side, there are a lot of other considerations that needs to come in. But this is the idea and the different types of audit opinions you can get. So you have unmodified opinion and the modified opinion. Modified opinion, you have disclaimer, qualified, adverse. And you have emphasis of matter here. So altogether, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 types. Okay. So that's what we say. The auditor may modify the opinion if there are reasons to do that. Any questions, clarifications? So if you look at the annual reports of companies, you might find this kind of different types of reports, opinions. Right. Then let me talk a little bit about this true and fair story. Right? We discussed about true and fair weave, but what it actually means is very important for us to know. Now, before we get this term true and fair, this was originally true and accurate, or true and correct. That was the initial term they used. The financial statements give true and correct view. It addresses two sides of your information. One is whether it is factually true. So you can record a sale in the books without actually selling, right? Then it is not true. There's a sales figure on the books which is not true. Without having a sale, you have recorded. It's a bogus sale. So the first thing the auditor look at it, when you have transactions recorded in the books, are you comfortable that these transactions have actually taken place? That's what the auditors look at. One thing. Secondly, if you look at the information provided or the amounts disclosed, are they correct? So if the value of the transaction is 99,898, right? And your book says 99,000, that is incorrect. It is true, but incorrect. There's a sale which is true, but the value is incorrect. It has to be the exact amount that needs to come in. Now, this approach, true and correct weave, had a problem. The problem is the auditor cannot issue a true and correct weave unless both these positions are established, and even there is a deviation of 1 rupee, argument's sake, it's incorrect. If the figure is 999 rupees and if you record as 1,000, it is incorrect. However, when you look at from the stakeholders' point of view for decision making, what is important is not the exact figure. Whether that deviation, if there's any, is significant enough to influence the decision is the question, right? Say, for example, would that be a major concern by a shareholder when you take a decision? Let's say this company has recorded 50 million, 250 million, 500,000, 258 is the exact sales figure, right? And if you just say 50 million, 500,000, would that be a major deviation? Whether there's any difference by the decision maker because of that difference of 250 rupees or something. So that's where the materiality comes in. We're discussing the materiality concept, right? Whether that deviation is material enough to impact the decision. So when that argument came into the picture, the auditors decided, let us change this term. Let us not use the word correct. Truth is important. Instead of the word correct, they replace it fair. It may not be correct, but it is fair to say 1,000, right? It's incorrect to say 1,000 when the figure is 999.50, but it's fair to have 1,000 because it's not significant. That's how the word fair came into the picture. And now we use the term true and fair view. But when you interpret this phrase, true and fair view, we should not go by the dictionary meaning of the two individual terms. You can go and find out what is true. You can go and find out what is fair from the dictionary. But the term true and fair view collectively has a wider meaning than the meaning of individual words. The collective interpretation of true and fair view is the organization has maintained proper books of accounts throughout the period. The transactions recorded and presented in the financial statements were actually taken place, right? They have actually taken place. That is true. There has been transactions. And the organization has followed the relevant accounting standards and other regulatory provisions in producing these financial statements. Therefore, you can rely on them. And they are compliant with the laws and regulations. So this entire explanation is embedded in this term when you say true and fair. That's the idea. There are certain terms in the accounting world. I mean, there are phrases. Those phrases gives a wider meaning than the individual words. And if you look at these fixed assets, we don't use the word fixed assets anymore in the accounting world. We call it property, plant and equipment, right? Property, plant and equipment is the term we use. So one can ask, where is vehicle? One can ask, where is computer, right? So because the heading is property, plant and equipment, so don't we need to park vehicles there? Don't we need to park furniture there, right? But we don't go by that. If you look at the individual meaning of these terms, property is one, plant is one, equipment is another. But these three terms putting into one phrase collectively, property, plant and equipment covers the entire gamut of fixed assets, right? All the fixed assets are clubbed and termed as property, plant and equipment. Even if you have one item in your organization, let's say we have only a building, still the term property, plant and equipment has to be used. You can't say we don't have equipment in our organization, just say property and plant. No. It's a technical term. Likewise, true and fair is also a technical phrase we use to give a wider meaning. Right. Any questions, clarifications? So by the way, I know that you had a very short break between the classes, right? I told that anyway there is a break in my class because we can't do 3 hours at a stretch. There'll be a break in the middle. If you think that you want to take the break a little early because you want to have lunch or anything, maybe I can give that a little early and then we can continue after that. Or I can go up to 2 and then give the break. What is convenient to you? Any suggestion? I'm comfortable. I'll give you about 20 minutes break.
I prefer having lunch.
Now?
Yeah, no.
Okay. Yeah, okay, because you know, empty stomach can't learn anything. Right? Right. So now it's almost 3:40. We'll meet up at 2.
Okay.
Right. Great.
Yes.